Hello, beekeepers. It's absolutely shocking how fast time passes. Just a few days ago that I did a video for you on last month's article. Well, indeed, it was 4 weeks ago. But here it is. This is for the May 2021 issue of Bee Culture magazine. Specifically, I'd like to go in some of the finer points that I went into on this article. I'm working on keeping my beehives smaller. I'm not quitting beekeeping, but I surely am getting older. Every year, I'm a year older. And every year, the weight of honey is the same. I've talked about this now since last November, December. I had an epiphany late last summer that I was not going to be able to continue to pick up these heavy pieces of equipment. I needed to adapt in some way. So I want to go back, and ironically, I'm actually going back to where I started almost 50 years ago. The first bees I ever got were just little nukes. They were little splits that my uncle brought to me. 2 of those things, as I recall. So it was only later that I began to buy packages and go that way. So I'm going to go back and explain why. When you buy a nuke, you get brood. So you don't get that drop that you get when you install packages. When you install packages, oh, maybe a few weeks later, you actually have fewer bees than you had when you install the packages, because as the package bees die off, initially, they're not replaced. You don't get that slump with a split or with a nucleus purchase. Pay more for it because you're getting frames, brood, and the whole thing. So I want to go back and explore that some. And I'd like to look at every aspect of beekeeping, because beekeeping has changed. I mean, you cannot imagine, even when I started in the mid-70s or so, how much the catalogs have changed, how much resource you have available to you now compared to then. Gadgets, gizmos, things, contraptions, there's all kind of things that you can buy for your beekeeping effort. So I'd like to review some of that stuff. And what I did was I looked at the very bottom of my hive. When you go back and you start considering, I want to reconsider everything. I want to start at the bottom and work my way up. Before I did that, I quickly considered hive stands, because I don't want to stoop anymore. So the hive stands are not for the bees. They're not for the raccoons and the skunks. They're for my back, where I'm trying to not have to lean over, bend over so much. And one of the things that I really got distracted with was the Miller deep bottom board. Mr. Miller, all those years ago, Dr. Miller, said that that deep bottom board, 2 inches deep, gave the bees a place to cluster those hot summer days, or in those cold winter nights when they were freezing cold outside. But if you have these deep bottom boards on, 2 inches deep, during a nectar flow, you're going to get brood underneath there. So Dr. Miller said he would slide a rack in to take up that space. I think that what he was describing was a slatted rack. So I went into slatted racks. This is the modern day version of a slatted rack. I don't know when the changes happened. As I was contesting this design, a more recent beekeeper pointed out to me that this style with the slats running in the same plane as the bottom of the frames allowed varroa mites to drop off the frames above and fall through the slats and down to the screen below, and then ultimately out of the hive. In my way of thinking, the slats are not running the correct way. In this picture I've got of an antique slatted rack, my idea of an antique, I actually built this thing years ago. It was destroyed in our tornado of 2010. But you can see how it originally worked, and you see the board up front. That was to break up the air draft. So not only did it give the bees a place to cluster, but it broke up the air draft that would pass right up through the colony, caused by the wind blowing in the front entrance. So it was a different design. It was not just for Varroa and just for space, but it was also for wintering efficiency to help some there. Design has changed. So if you buy a slatted rack now, you'll get the new improved model that lets Varroa fall through. I'm old-fashioned. I kind of want the old device the way it was because I'd like to leave it on year-round. I spent some time discussing some of the comments and questions that Kim and I get from our podcast. And one of the beekeepers asked, what is the most useful gadget that you use in your bee operation that you didn't buy in a bee catalog? That was insightful. That was clever. I've never been asked that before. My immediate thought was my old electronic friend, my iPhone. I depend on this to call 911 when I need help. I depend on this to tell me what the latest control is for Varroa. I mean, it's just right there. I cannot imagine my life now without that electronic gadget, but I don't think that's what the beekeeper had in mind. So one of the surprising gadgets that I use a lot, is it my favorite? Well, I can't say it's my favorite. I'm saying that it's a go-to tool a lot that I didn't buy from a bee supply company, is my Milwaukee heat gun. This thing is useful for softening wax, for softening propolis, for getting wax off the floor, for getting wax off of my hive tool. I made the comment that I've worked out a technique for taking my pocket knife, putting a small chip of beeswax right here in the hinge, hold it as far away from you as you can, or wear a glove, heat that, melt that wax through the hinge of my pocket knife, and I get a nice smooth flow of opening and closing when I need to. This gadget has a lot of use. It's got all these fittings that I sometimes use or don't use. It helps with the seized up bearing on an extractor. It's just good to have this thing sitting around somewhere. I don't think anybody expected a Milwaukee heat gun to be one of my go-to devices. I like this kind of thing. I paid $5 for this, and I don't know what it is to this day, but to me it looked like a huge scraper for beehive equipment. So I paid $5 for this thing off the bargain shelf back in the back corner of the TSC store. I don't know why it does this. It was like it would have some kind of round effect. So I've used this occasionally when you've really got a lot of burr comb on there or whatever. It's like a hive tool on steroids. How can you be a beekeeper and not have a compression tacker? You got to have those for closing up entrances and whatever. Younger beekeepers, you can't imagine what life was like before battery-powered tools. And you would go out, maybe you'd use something like this antique. So when you had to drill holes or bore holes in something without battery-powered tools or without stringing extension cords from all across the bee yard, battery-powered drills changed all that. Battery-powered skill saws. I love that stuff. I like this old equipment, this battery, until my battery goes dead. This battery will never go dead. But you got to have it out there with you, and you got to drill by hand, and you got bees flying, and you got gloves on, so it's not always convenient. I'm just talking in this month's article about this change, about my eagerness, that I want to get back into it. I want bees so I can manage them again. And I spent a remarkable amount of time comparing that eagerness growing, maxing out, and then that eagerness declining as my age increases and as my physical stamina decreases, and what can I do to address those issues. And this technique I'm using for me, it's not mine, it's in the literature, you've done it, people write me, they describe what they're doing. I'm not the only one on this journey, trying to find our way and to make beekeeping fit us wherever we are on this beekeeping path that we've all chosen. Had a nice visit to my wood shop today. I hope you enjoy beekeeping as much as I do. If you got any comments that you'd like to make, any additions you want to add, any criticisms that should be made, feel free to comment. I enjoy talking with you. Thanks for watching. Jim 2 telling you bye.